good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The following show is just horrifying. Beware.
You're not cheating on your wife if you eat my lemon square.
Your lemon squares taste like ass.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking new to the yaba, are ya? We're talking so many stubbies. And we're talking some really upsetting kangaroo hunting. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and they think Janette's a slut!
Yes, they do.
They really do. This poor, seemingly only woman in this town is a big old slut. But, so we are discussing, everyone, Ted Kotcheff's Wake in Fright, a seminal Australian horror film from the early 70s that I am embarrassed to say I have never heard of.
Well, I mean, it's actually not that surprising, apart from the fact that it was rescued in 2009 and then seemingly picked up by Shudder, and now it just kind of seems to be a mainstay. But yeah, I think if you ask the average person, they're not going to know what this movie is.
Not at all. And when we get into some history of Australian cinema and the Australian New Wave, which I will do in my production because I'm amazing, there's a lot of films in there that I'm just like, oh shit, I haven't heard of 95% of these movies. And it really makes you think with international cinema, because I think people forget that Australia or even Britain is like international cinema because they speak English. But it makes you realize how many films don't make it to North America, even.
Right. In fact, I distinctly remember at the end of last week's episode, you even said, this isn't international because they speak English. So that was just you? You're talking about you?
I grew a lot over the past week.
I love that for you.
But everyone, just a real quick thing before we dive in. Real hard emphasis on the animal violence in this film. This is Cannibal Holocaust levels of real violence. The film does give you a warning at the end of the film, but not the beginning.
No. Yeah, we'll unpack it as we go. But folks, if you have not watched this, there are two different segments. So you may watch the first one and be like, oh, it's not that bad. It's the second one that's really, really bad.
AKA what I did to Joe, where I was like acting like an edgelord, like, that wasn't that bad. Oh, it's still going. Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay, so there is a lot to unpack here. So I think we need maybe not one, but two guests tonight, Joe.
Of course. We're going down under, so we need to have another foursome.
Oh my god, I'm so excited for your, I'm so excited for all your Australian little tidbits of knowledge that you have from living in Australia.
Yeah, as all the Australians scream at the podcast because they're like, you're a fucking idiot and you don't know what you're talking about.
You're a fucking Canadian idiot and you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly, yes. Commonwealth, rejoice.
All right, everyone. Well, why don't we bring in our guests from the wings? So they are the co-hosts of A Nightmare on Fierce Street, a self-described epic monstrous podcast about the fiercest topic, horror. You may have also seen us in their Thirsty Thursday YouTube series, which is basically a really fun recorded conversation / happy hour of all of us drinking and talking horror. Please welcome Trent, Reese, and Sharai Bohannon.
Hi, thank you for having us. Yes. Long-time listeners, first-time callers.
Well, welcome onto the show, and thank you for watching Wake in Fright? ?
Oh.
I mean, it's always a good time to see something random on Shudder, even if it's something that is confusing and hurts your head a little bit. So I'm happy I can say I saw it, yes.
Yes, I actually had never heard of this film, but it was a time. It was an interesting moment in my life, and I'm still not really sure what I watched, but hopefully I get some clarity in this conversation.
You know, it's funny, because Joe, when we were messaging last night, as he was living out my reaction to the kangaroo murder in real time, he told me, he was like, this is, because, it's kind of towing the line of genre, right? Like, we're discussing this on a horror movie podcast, but I'm not going to get in semantics about what horror is, but it is a very anxiety-inducing film, which is what Joe told me, and I was like, ooh, yes, hard agree on that.
I'm curious, Trent and Sharai, have the two of you watched much of the new French Extremity?
I want to say the only one that I finished was, it's the one that Dean Koontz was mad about.
Oh, High Tension.
Thank you. I don't know how that one escaped me. That's the one I finished, and then I started Irreversible with Jasmine Girl That's Scary. It was one of the people that had to, like, leave. I was like, I'm getting nauseous, and so I'm just gonna, like, step out.
Oh, that's Noé too, though. Like, Noé in general is a real, you gotta be in the mood for that shit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the same boat with Sharai. The only one I've finished is High Tension, which I can now say I've seen twice, multiple times. I saw it when it first came out, and then I watched it when we covered it with Nightmare on 5th Street. And yeah, so that's been my only experience into that world.
Okay. The reason that I ask is because I messaged Trace that I think this movie, Wake and Fright, is similar in at least spirit to the movie Calvaire, which we covered on our podcast in the first year. And that one's about a man who kind of enters this hallucinatory fever dream style town where all of the women are gone and it's just men. And it's very... Like, I don't want to say this movie is about toxic masculinity. It's definitely a deconstruction of masculinity, but this idea of, like, towns that are populated entirely by men and there's just a weird homosocial order going on, they'd make an interesting pair to watch, although it'd be a lot.
Well, but also the way, I mean, the basic premise of man, it cannot escape said town. Like, in terms of, I agree with you in spirit, but also I think the narratives are very, very similar, as well as, the feeling you get when watching it. Because, everyone, if you have not watched Calvaire or listened to our episode on it, there is not only anal rape in that movie, but there's also bestiality in that movie. So beware.
Oh.
Good times for all.
Everyone just make a quick note of that one if it wasn't already on your list.
Well, because when we covered it, it was like one of our first 10 episodes. So we didn't have any clout, so people probably didn't listen to that much.
Like, but way to make an impression to be like, okay, we're on episode 5 now.
Time to break out the big guns.
We're going in.
All right. You're going to remember us.
Well, okay, so I do have a lot to discuss about this movie because it is one of those quote-unquote lost films, as Joe mentioned. And then, again, I'm about to say, not a lot happens in this movie, but I feel like we're going to have a lot to discuss about the last, 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we jump right into this, okay? So everyone, in case you haven't seen this film, Wake and Fright, initially released as Outback outside of Australia, is a 1971 psychological thriller directed by Ted Kotcheff, written by Evan Jones, and it is based on Kenneth Cook's 1961 novel of the same name, following a young schoolteacher who descends into personal moral degradation after finding himself stranded in a brutal, menacing town in outback Australia. Now, I haven't read the book. Joe was really upset when he found out there was a book because he would have read said book. So I did the best thing ever, and I read the Wikipedia plot of the book. And honestly, this seems like a very faithful adaptation. The only two differences I could really note, and again, they're kind of not really big differences, but here they are. So one, the character of Robin is not actually our lead character's girlfriend, but rather a woman he briefly encountered in Sydney that he hopes to impress.
Okay.
Oh.
And in regards to the maybe or maybe not gay sex scene in this film, which we will discuss ad nauseum later, it's kind of vague in the book as well. It's a thing where Grant, our lead character, faintly recalls being on the receiving end of a homosexual encounter initiated by the Donald Pleasence character Doc, but it's never, at least according to the summary, never confirmed. It's always just a suspicion in his mind.
That I wouldn't say is correct because I did read a paper, which of course I did not take the title of, so I'm now just sounding like I'm making shit up. But I read the passage where they talk about the sex scene, and he basically says something happened twice. And it's okay, well, that's relatively on the up and up.
I actually think, too, having Robin not be his girlfriend, but a woman he briefly encountered in Sydney, that actually...
It changes things.
Well, it makes the queer reading more apt, because Sharai and Trent, what I want you to do, and I thought about this today, because this movie sat with me today, pretend like what this movie is about is just a queer man who is struggling with his sexuality, who is in this town and trying to fight his queer urges and be a straight man.
I thought that's what it was going to be. And my first note, like the first 5 minutes when I was a precious young baby, was, is this the Australian Cabaret? And it was not. It was very much not.
Okay, but now we want to see that movie, so somebody out there is going to have to make it.
Somebody.
I wish I could do an Australian accent, because I'd just be like, Sally Bowes, but in Australian, you know? Okay. So, as early as 1963, a film adaptation of this novel was linked with the actor Dirk Bogarde in the lead role. Joe, does that name sound familiar to you?
You're cueing me, and I'm going to let you down because no.
Okay. If that sounds familiar, it's also because he was the original choice to play Mark in Michael Powell's Peeping Tom.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
It's okay. But so everyone, that's like twice in 2 months that this actor has like been tied to roles that he didn't get. So never heard of this actor, but apparently he's really big. So there we go. Also, go listen to our Peeping Tom episode because it's really good. The original plan was to also have the director be Joseph Losey, best known for directing the movie M, aka one of the first films about a serial killer.
Right.
Australian novelist and playwright Maurice West later secured the film rights and tried, unsuccessfully, to raise funding for the film's production. So, we kind of move through the 60s here, and the rights are eventually bought by Australian company NLT Productions and American firm Group W Films, making the film an international co-production between Australia, the US, and Britain. Canadian director Ted Kotcheff was recruited to direct the film. And Joe, you know, Yaya's Canadian.
What, has it gotten tired after 4 years?
No, not at all. Also, I'd never heard of this director, but it actually turns out because I haven't seen any of his films. But if y'all didn't know, Kotcheff would continue to have a very successful film career as a director. His later films would include the original Fun with Dick and Jane from 1977, Rambo: First Blood in 1982, wow, and the 1988 comedy classic Weekend at Bernie's.
I'm sorry, wait.
This is like a roller coaster of a career here.
Wait. Okay, so, like, I can see Fun with Dick and Jane a little bit after watching this movie, but, like, Rambo, okay, maybe Rambo, because, now that I say that out loud,
masculinity,
yes.
yeah.
But Weekend at Bernie's, that's different. That's not like the others.
Versatility.
Well, one of the weirdest things that we found is actually that there's a lot of fluidity between people who are working in horror and people who end up working in comedy. We've talked about it because they're similar sort of genres in a number of different ways, but yeah, it's wild the number of folks who were like, oh, I got my start in comedy and then I moved into horror, or vice versa. And you're just like, huh.
And that makes sense, along the lines of the genre, because there's so much of horror that wouldn't work without comedy, and there's so much of comedy that wouldn't work without the shock of horror,
I guess I'm not giving Weekend at Bernie's its credit for being a dark comedy, because as a kid, I'm like, bright colors, Andrew McCarthy. But they were a couple of dudes dragging around a dead body on a beach, and so, like, I should revisit that before I sit here with my jaw in hell.
Well, if you or listeners even, like, if y'all are like real big film buffs, it is directors, sometimes writers, but also the one crew member that I see have the most, like, going back and forth between horror and comedy are editors. Those are the ones where I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, because when you think about it, timing editing with a joke and timing editing with a scare are very, very similar.
Yeah.
So, Kotcheff asked multiple British actors to play the part of John Grant, and he particularly wanted Michael York, who I really only know from Austin Powers, so forgive me, but...
And Cabaret.
Oh, yes. And Cabaret.
Perfect.
I was like, I'll just see myself out.
Sure, he's like, my work here is done.
Full circle.
Cabaret is like not my favorite musical. I really don't like the movie. I know, I don't like the movie. But
bad gay.
Here's the thing. The movie, I'm using movie musical in quotes because I don't really consider that movie a musical very much because they only sing in the cabaret, but they introduced a song just for the movie called Mine Hair that was so loved that they added it to the Broadway production.
Yep.
That is one of my go-to karaoke songs. I love singing Mine Hair.
So true story, I have 2 theater degrees and I hate musical theater, but I love cabaret.
See, maybe that's why. Because I love musical theater.
You two are just opposite ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. This happens with a lot of my musical theater friends. They're just like, I want to do this one. I want to do that one. I'm like, those are awful. Let's do cabaret. And so, I don't know.
The abortion play?
Listen, yes. And so maybe y'all understand music in a way I don't. And I'm like, give me this dark story. Let me be Sally Bowles. I got gin. And so...
No, because there are plenty of very dark musicals. Like, it's not just Cabaret.
It's just the one I like. Because a lot of my friends are like, oh, this is dark. I'm like, what's it about? And they're like, oh, it's basically Babe the Pig story. And I'm like, that's not dark. Is he making the bacon? What is happening? What?
Okay, Sharai, I'm gonna curate a list for you, but
Thank you.
We're gonna figure this out.
And I will say, I actually do like Cabaret, but I don't love the film adaptation of Cabaret.
They're different.
We're just all over the map.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
I've only seen Cabaret the film. I think it's mostly fine. I'll take the Schitt's Creek version, though.
Oh,
yes.
Although you haven't lived until you've seen a high school production of Cabaret where they have to edit out the abortion and all the sexy stuff. It is horrible.
It's a different play.
What is wrong with the U.S.?
So it's just 10 minutes?
Right?
Exactly. Oh, I mean, I've seen a high school do Chicago. I mean,
oh my God. Isn't that depressing?
It's bad.
It's a musical about murder. If you
and
can't
sex.
have a high school... Listen, what are the kids thinking about? Chicago Junior? What is that?
Oh my God, Chicago Junior. I love it. They're not even wearing like flapper dresses. It's just like mini skirts.
It's like the Russian like the big fur coats with the hats.
Okay. Bring us back.
Okay.
Bring us back.
I know. We're already off track, and we're like 10 minutes in. 15 minutes. Oh my God. Okay. So eventually, Kotcheff casts a 29-year-old Gary Bond, persuaded by his audition and his strong CV. NLT and Group W pushed him as the new Peter O'Toole, which is seemingly why he dyed his hair blonde for this part.
Oh.
Sure.
Oh, it's not natural. Okay.
I'm going into a bit of gossip here, but I have a point. So, editor Anthony Buckley said that Bond was affable, likable, and somewhat shy, but crew members found him diffident. Monica Dawkins, the film's makeup artist, remembered that out of hours, he was very nice, but during shooting, he kept himself apart. He wasn't comfortable around people. So, in case y'all didn't know, Bond had a lot of experience in the theater. He only made 3 films, and Wake and Fright was his final one. But within the theatrical profession, Bond was openly gay. From 1969 to 1976, he was the partner of actor Jeremy Brett. Jeremy Brett is actually, back to musical theater, best known for playing Freddie Eynsford Hill, aka Audrey Hepburn's potential suitor, that is not her suitor, in the film adaptation of My Fair Lady. Now, 3 years ago, in Gary O'Connor's 2019 biography of Ian McKellen, Bond is actually brought up in this biography because he and McKellen supposedly had an affair in the early 70s.
Scandalous.
I know.
Ooh.
Alert the presses.
A former lover of Bond's said that he was part of one of the first relatively out gay couples with Jeremy Brett, but theirs was an on-off liaison which lasted for years, again, for like 7 years from 69 to 76. Bond was irresistible, with an easy warmth of manner, wonderful humor, and sometimes a wicked sense of fun. He was divine, lovely, and wonderful in bed. So,
that last piece is really the most important, isn't it?
Well, it is. But contrast that with what these other people were saying, where he's like, oh, he's really reserved, he's diffident, he's like not really good with people. And I'm like, well, that's probably because he was gay in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he got sent to a penal colony where he was the Brit on the Australian set.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know how, like, that set, the environment, the atmosphere of that set was, And also, I think it helps his character because his character isn't connected to anyone.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, and if you're reading him as a queer character, the fact that the actor playing him is also queer adds a lot of layers to that can really help support your read.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Bond actually did die of AIDS-related causes in 1995, but I only bring it up because he died exactly 1 month after Jeremy Brett's death as well.
Aw.
I know.
They moved on together.
Yes, exactly. The film shooting began in January 1970 in the mining town of Broken Hill, New South Wales, the area which had inspired Cook for the setting of his novel. The world premiere of Wake and Fright as Outback occurred on opening night of the 1971 Cannes Film Festival on May 13th. Alongside Nicholas Roeg's Walkabout, it was one of 2 Australian films to be nominated for the Grand Prix du Festival, and Kotcheff was nominated for a Golden Palm Award for directing it. Internationally, the film opened commercially in the United Kingdom in October of 1971, and in the United States in February of 1972. It found a favorable public response in France, where it ran for 5 months, and in the United Kingdom. However, despite receiving such critical support at Cannes and in Australia, Wake and Fright suffered poor domestic box office returns. Although there were complaints that the film's distributor, United Artists, had failed to promote the film successfully, it was also thought that the film was perhaps too uncomfortably direct and uncompromising to draw large Australian audiences. During an early Australian screening, one man stood up, pointed at the screen, and protested, "That's not us." To which Jack Thompson yelled back, "Sit down, mate. It is us." Jack Thompson plays Dick in the film, by the way.
What do you do as a person watching a movie if that happens? Like, what do you do? You're just like, are you really going to yell at the screen? Is he really going to yell at you? Can I get a refund?
And it's a thing, too, where it's like, I mean, look, Australia isn't like, well, it is kind of a big continent, but it's like...
Yeah, it is.
It is a big continent. but like, you know, you're like, okay, well, this is what the rest of the world's going to see and think about us, right? And this film doesn't exactly portray Australian man in the most positive light, exactly. So I get it, but...
Yeah. Also, my question with with Australia in this movie, granted, I get it, it's the 70s, and I've never been to Australia, so I don't know. But, like, is Australia this desolate? Like, are there no people?
Yeah, in certain regions, and I say this again as a member of the Commonwealth, because, like, most of Canadians live within, I think it's like 100 kilometers of the US border because it's warmer, and a lot of Australians live on the coast, but there are these, like, mining towns, agricultural places that, like, are in the outback, and it is like this, where they're really cut off and they are isolated.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if the opening shot of this movie is any indication, that's what you're in for.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's very on par with what the rest of the world, like, not so much the people, but, like, the vistas and the landscape, and even, like, the kind of reddish dirt. It's what a lot of people outside of Australia know Australia for, and especially at this particular time, where it's like, we're getting films like this and Walkabout, which are both all about the outback experience. Like, you wouldn't even know that there was a city, like you just said, Trent.
It's like when people think about Texas when they think we all live on ranches and horses.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen.
You don't? Wait.
Like, you don't? No, I wish I could make
Trace, how many horses do you own? Okay.
I own 7. In addition to the film's atmosphere of sordid realism, which, really good phrase, the kangaroo hunting scene contains graphic footage of kangaroos actually being shot. As I mentioned earlier, the film does include a disclaimer in the form of a producer's note in the credits. So yeah, that scene was a point of contention with Australians and, well, any viewer that watched the movie.
Right.
Anyone with a heart, yes.
So much so that even in the 2009 Cannes screening of the film, because once it got restored, and I'll go into that in a bit, 12 people walked out during the kangaroo hunt.
Yeah.
Kotcheff, a vegetarian, has even defended his use of the hunting footage in the film, though.
It's not the flex he thinks it is. It really isn't, the way he talks about it.
Yeah. So, okay, let's flash forward like a decade or two. So, by the 1990s, Wake and Fright had developed a cult reputation as Australia's great lost film because its master negative had gone missing, resulting in censored prints of degraded quality being used for its few television broadcasts and VHS releases. For many years, the only known print of Wake and Fright was found in Dublin, and it was considered of insufficient quality for transfer to DVD or videotape for commercial release.
That's pretty rough.
Very bad. So, in response to this situation, Wake and Fright's editor, again, Anthony Buckley, began to search in 1994 for a better preserved copy of the film in an uncut state. It wasn't until 8 years later in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, of all fucking places.
Dublin and Pittsburgh, sure.
It all ends up in America.
Buckley found the negatives of Wake and Fright in a shipping container labeled "for destruction."
Oh, fuck.
He rescued the material, which formed the basis for the film's painstaking 2009 restoration. Eventually, a 35mm print in excellent condition had also survived in the collection of the Library of Congress, which screened it in the library's Mary Pickford Theater in 2008, although its reported runtime of only 96 minutes, which is 12 minutes shorter than the actual runtime, suggests this was an edited version.
Yeah.
Following the film's restoration, Wake and Fright, again, like I said, screened at the Cannes Film Festival in May of 2009. It was, Joe, another Peeping Tom connection. It was selected as a Cannes Classic title by the head of the department, one Martin Scorsese.
I'm telling you, the dude's out there doing God's work rescuing underseen films.
Yeah, and Sharai and Trent, he did the same thing with Peeping Tom, where it was like when that movie was like basically booed out of like Britain, he found it 20 years later and was like, no, this is a cinema classic. We have to make this happen.
That scans. I always envision Martin Scorsese as sort of like the film nerd who people were like, oh yeah, whatever, Marty.
They listen.
Right? Now they're like, oh, Marty made it. Damn it.
Except he doesn't like Marvel movies, so we all hate him now. Fuck.
I mean, has he only seen the origin stories? Because if so, that explains a lot of his thoughts about him.
He's only seen the Thor sequel, so it's really quite understandable.
Right? Tell him to watch WandaVision. It'll be fine.
Yeah, he's not going to like that anymore. But, okay, so Wake and Fright is actually one of only 2 films to ever screen twice in the history of the Cannes Film Festival, the other being Michelangelo Antonioni's L'Avventura. But Scorsese said, Wake and Fright is a deeply, and I mean deeply, unsettling and disturbing movie. I saw it when it premiered at Cannes in 1971, and it left me speechless. Visually, dramatically, atmospherically, and psychologically, it's beautifully calibrated and gets under your skin one encounter at a time, right along with the protagonist played by Gary Bond. I'm excited that Wake and Fright has been preserved and restored, and that it is finally getting the exposure it deserves.
Good job, Marty.
For someone who hates superheroes, he sure is kind of one for film.
Oh, I like that. So this 2009 re-release was released to widespread acclaim. Box office-wise, this is the only numbers that I have. It grossed about $62,000 its opening weekend and eventually earned about $320,000. It made $50,000 during a 2012 re-release in the United States and was later issued commercially on DVD and Blu-ray later that same year. We are looking at an approval rating of 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average rating of 8.7 out of 10. Metacritic, we've got an 85 out of 100, and Letterboxd, we've got an 8 out of 10. Wake and Fright is now considered a pivotal film of the Australian New Wave and the Ozploitation cycle, earning praise from contemporary critics for Kotcheff's direction and the cast performances. It was also remade as a 2-part miniseries that aired in 2017, but Joe, according to you, that is maybe not worth checking out.
It's really slow and boring.
All right.
Here's the thing. It just doesn't have any of the atmosphere because they modernize it. So it's like, you know, he gets into a car crash and then can't afford to pay for it because somebody steals his wallet. And you're just like, boo. Nobody cares.
Wait, so he doesn't gamble it away?
He does, but honestly, it ends up feeling more like Animal Kingdom, the Australian film with Joel Edgerton. Not Animal Kingdom, the Alan Menken, Sean Hatosi remake television series. But basically, it's just, it feels like a generic crime film, only it's stretched to about 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Which is an hour longer than the movie we are discussing today.
Right, I feel like even this movie felt like it could have been trimmed a little bit just to give it a nicer pacing.
Yeah, this is 1970s pacing for sure.
Yes.
Like, this is harder
100%.
to watch as a modern audience.
Okay, so I mentioned 2 things. So I mentioned the Australian New Wave and I mentioned Ozploitation. And Joe, I asked you the other day what Ozploitation was, and I feel dumb because I feel like you may have told me what that was on one of our previous Australian episodes, like Boys in the Trees, or The Loved Ones, or Relic.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's an exploitation film, but it happens to be made in Australia, hence Ozploitation. But Aussies did a good little run of it, similar to the Canadian slashers that were created during the tax shelter era. So they realized, if we make genre, or in this case, genre-adjacent films, we can make a decent amount of money. And
so examples of the time period of films like that, you know, we've got Patrick, we've got Road Games, all the Mad Max films are considered Ozploitation, Razorback, and then, by the way, y'all, just go to the Wikipedia page for Ozploitation. There was a laundry list, but more modern films. And it's low-budget horror, comedy, sexploitation, and action. So it's kind of a wide net we're casting here, but more modern examples would be Wolf Creek, Rogue, Lake Mungo, Triangle, and Daybreakers.
Yeah.
Taking notes.
There's a lot more than that, but those are the ones that I saw that I recognize. But going back out a bit, though, the Australian New Wave. So I just want to do this, and I'll pass it over to you, Joe. So the Australian film industry declined after World War II, coming to a virtual stop by the 1960s. The Gorton and Whitlam governments, which took place from 1968 to 1975, intervened and rescued the industry from its expected oblivion. The federal and several state governments established bodies to assist with the funding of film production and the training of filmmakers throughout the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School, which fostered a new generation of Australian filmmakers who were able to bring their visions to the screen. So, the 1970s 70s saw a huge renaissance of the Australian film industry. Australia produced nearly 400 films between 1970 and 1985, more than had been made in the history of the Australian film industry. In contrast to pre-New Wave films, New Wave films are often viewed as fresh and creative.
Wow. Shady.
They possess a vitality, a love of open spaces, and a propensity for sudden violence and languorous sexuality. The straight-ahead narrative style of many Australian New Wave films reminded American audiences of the Hollywood maverick period of the late 60s and early 70s that had just about run its course. Actors like Mel Gibson, Nicole Kidman, and Sam Neill launched international careers through their work in the Australian New Wave. Just some historical context for y'all, but why don't we get into Wake in Fright?
Okay, so Trace and I are probably going to draw on 2 articles for this. So we've got Gary Kramer, who wrote a piece called Gay Undertones Captivate in Rare Aussie Movie for the Philadelphia Gay News, and also Patrick Sproul, who wrote Homoeroticism and Sexual Repression in Wake in Fright for Little White Lies. So, with that in context, we begin in the isolated outback town of Tebonda, and then that is not a real place from what I understand. I think both of these locations are fictitiously made up, but they are based on real places.
Well, I was like, could you imagine if do we know the real places they're based on?
The place that they shot the actual film, Battle Creek, I believe is actually meant to be Yaba.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just imagining the actual citizens of those places being like, what the fuck?
That's not us.
We don't flip coins.
Yeah, I have thoughts about 2-Ups, for sure.
Same.
Which, by the way, also has its own dedicated Wikipedia page.
Yeah, because it's a real thing, apparently.
I thought they made that up. So, like, what is this game? I mean, I know gambling is a gamble, but damn.
I still don't think I understand how the game is played.
So, I have this for you, Trent. So, it involves a designated spinner, aka the person, throwing 2 coins, usually pennies, into the air. Players bet on whether the coins will fall with both heads, obverse, up, both tails, reverse, up, or with 1 coin ahead and 1 a tail, known as Ewan. It is traditionally played on Anzac Day, a national day of remembrance in Australia and New Zealand that broadly commemorates all citizens who served and died in all wars, conflicts, and peacekeeping operations.
It's basically their Remembrance Day.
Yes, exactly.
Listen, I did not think that game had that much depth. I thought it was something they made up because they couldn't have real gambling in the 70s on film. And because, it felt very much like in New Girl when they came up with the Americans, and you really don't know the rules. They just do shit with couch cushions.
Sure.
And I was like,
or Penny Cup in Cougar Town.
Penny Can. Yeah. Or Shardy McDinnis in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
God, yes.
Just less complicated.
Yeah.
I learned something new today.
Well, we're about to learn more based on this guy's teaching situation.
Oh, God. Yeah, right. That's depressing.
Yeah, so our introduction is this slow 360-degree pan, just so that we understand how isolated the town is. And our protagonist is John Grant, who is played by Gary Bond. And I don't know about you folks, but I immediately was like, okay, so he's a bit of a disengaged teacher because he is just waiting out the clock with these kids who are so desperate to go on Christmas break.
Yeah.
Well, he does, because he's trapped there. He doesn't like this town. And so, Joe, can you explain this to us, how this bond system works?
So, I don't know if this is something that still happens, but basically, as a new teacher, he would either have to pay to get out of the $1,000 bond, in which case he would be allowed to go to somewhere he might actually want to go, maybe like a big city such as Sydney, but in his case he doesn't have that money, so until he can pay the $1,000 he goes where they tell him, which is going to be these shitty outback towns that are super small.
So he's miserable from point A of this movie.
Correct, yes. So it's Christmas break. That means that he gets 6 weeks off, so he ends up packing a suitcase. He tells local bartender Charlie, who is played by John Mellion, that he is basically leaving, and you get every indication that he is hoping to not ever have to come back here.
He's in for a rude awakening in Fright.
He actually going to have to stay there longer than he would have if he just set his ass down.
I know.
Right? Yeah, and he'd probably be a little bit richer, and he wouldn't have a metal plate in his head.
Oh my God.
Ooh, I've got When we get to that moment, I've got thoughts. Because I was like, what are you doing?
Okay, so he catches the train, and basically the train will take him part of the way, and then he will catch a flight from Yaba to Sydney, which is his ultimate destination. And he gets on this train, and he is immediately, I'm going to use the word accosted, because he is very unreceptive, by a group of drunken locals who are drinking heavily, and they are singing, and they invite him to join them, because this movie is all about killing you with hospitality. And John Grant wants none of it. He wants to be left alone for the most part. So he does ignore them. He tries to go to sleep, and what he dreams about are beers on the beach with his bikini-clad girlfriend Robin, who is played by Nancy Knudsen.
Who we will never see after like his flashback to him pushing a bottle of booze in her tits.
Right?
Well, he has flashes of her throughout the film, but yeah, like she's basically just a mirage. She exists only in his mind. We will never meet her.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like every time we see her is just aggressively heterosexual.
Oh my god. I do love that it's like the camera tilts down so that we can get a better look at her cleavage.
Well, but that's the thing, right? If we want to read him as a queer man, which I'm going to do for the rest of this episode, like, it's like he's giving himself like exposure therapy. It's like, if I keep thinking about this woman's physique, maybe I won't be gay anymore.
Right.
I will say one of the things that I caught in this movie is that, like, the way they handle boobs, because, like, again, it was the 70s and we have a male director, and so usually it's all just like boobs everywhere, and you're like, where's the film? Where are the actors? I can't see past them. The way they were handled here, like, it was almost like, here's a little peek of some cleavage, ooh. And then you get, like, some full frontal on our lead, and I was like, oh, hello, 70s.
I mean, that was a nice moment, I'm not gonna lie.
Listen, I love a good dick. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes.
We don't get enough of it, like, in any genre.
Well,
but, like,
no.
Yeah.
But also, so I will commend Kotcheff and cinematographer Brian West for this. Yeah, there's... Even the full frontal scene for Bond, it doesn't feel exploitative. It doesn't feel gratuitous. It's just like, we are just watching a man walk across the room naked. And that's, again, like, I mean, this is the 70s, so it's just classier like that. But it's just like, you don't see that very often in movies, period, because it's always the butt of a joke, right?
Yep, and Trace, you're going to love it, but I'm going to bring in Don't Look Now, because it features the same kind of casual nudity that... Yeah, it does feel like it's different in the 70s, where we were just comfortable saying, hey, people sometimes hang out nude around the people that they love, the people that they're fucking, when they're just by themselves and they've woken up after a bender. Sometimes people are just naked.
Yeah, and I also wondered if, this being an Australian film, and not because America is so, nude phobic or like body phobic, sex phobic, let's be real. So I wondered if, like, granted, I have a friend from Australia, but like I've never been there, so I didn't know like if they have different expectations or different environments about nudity or thoughts on nudity.
I would say that they're a little bit more progressive in that regard. I'm thinking of a lot of the films that I've seen. It doesn't have the same kind of shock tactic, but it does end up getting used often like this. It's either around sex, so it's natural, or it's people just kind of hanging out like, oh yeah, tits fall out sometimes. Sometimes dicks come out. Like, this is just life.
Yeah. Like, one of the things I did appreciate about this movie, and I mean, I have a whole situation with this movie, but one of the things I did appreciate is that I didn't feel like the women were being exploited and objectified. Because again, how often do you get to see these three? Because there was like 3 women in this whole movie.
Oh my God.
And I was never like, oh, those are her nipples for 5 minutes, unlike a lot of the things that we usually watch, and a lot of the rants I usually have to have about them. It was more like, here's the top of her cleavage, or we're going to unbutton her shirt but keep everything covered because he's going to vomit after he covers her. And I'm just like, oh, is this what it feels like when women are taken care of? Oh my God.
Well, it's also where we're desperately trying to make men feel uncomfortable for a change. Like, this movie is all about saying, hey, men, how do you feel in these aggressively masculine spaces?
I don't know about y'all, but I was very uncomfortable for a lot of these scenes. Like, this is I think at least for me, and maybe Joe, it's the same for you, but like the reason I was so anxious is because I was like, This is like worse than like being in a torture room for me. I don't want to be in a room with all these sweaty men, straight men, presumably straight men.
Maybe
there's some follow-up questions for a lot of them.
I know it's just, but it just seems like a not very safe place, and it's just the vibe is very like ugh. Like I don't like the vibe of anything happening in this movie.
It's what I envision goes on in frat houses, and that's why I never go in them.
Yes, very good.
I went in them one time. I went one time, and I can attest that yes.
No,
I've been to a frat house once, and yes.
I'm an expert, and
it was empty, but yes.
And I'll never go back again.
Like, I remember one time I almost went because they were like, well, there's free alcohol and you like alcohol. And I was like, I'd rather just pay for my own tonight. I don't think I have the energy for what goes on in there.
Sharai.
Well, as this movie makes clear, just because people are offering you free booze doesn't mean that they're your friends, and it doesn't mean that they're going to look out for you. So before we leave this train, I do want to raise something, just because I think it harkens back to the conversation, Trace, that you and I had with Aaron when we talked about Boys in the Trees. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 indigenous characters in this entire movie, and I'm using characters very liberally because they are characters in that we see them and they exist as people on screen. So there is an indigenous man on this train who is also kind of off on their own. They're not partaking in the beer drinking with the rowdy locals. And then there's also a woman who is in the back of Charlie's bar before he leaves Tabunda. And neither of these characters speak. And I thought it was interesting that they're always visually framed as either being on the margins or by themselves. And I guess it's just interesting in... If we're thinking about colonialism, this is something that, this is a very white film. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that in the Outback, you would see indigenous people. They would be around. And yet this film is suggesting like they're here, but this is not their story because we're telling white people's stories.
I think God, maybe this is crass because I'm so used to, for at least in America, in the United States, for indigenous to mean like, Native American brown. But in Australia, as indigenous, are they black?
They are often very dark-skinned, yes, but we're still talking about, for U.S. audiences, Native American, yeah. The way
you talked about that, and the way it's about the white people, but you see them in, like, the margins, and, like, they don't really get to tell their own story, it makes me, and I hate to be this theater kid, it makes me think of Oklahoma, because, they're always like, oh, no, the Native Americans are coming, but they're not saying Native Americans.
Yeah, they're not.
And so, like, there's this big fright that they're coming, and people are like have anxiety and they're afraid of them, and you never get to see them, you never get to hear them.
Yeah, it's the white panic.
The arts are always on the up and up, more usually when it comes to like social commentary, so they knew.
Oh, listen. For sure. Yeah. So John ends up getting off the train in Yaba. This is his connection. He doesn't have an actual connection to this town, though. Like, he is just there to stay the night. So he catches a cab and then goes to a hotel. Possibly my favorite character in this entire movie is a unnamed hotel receptionist who is played by Peggy Dents.
Very hot, as in, like, the temperature.
She was spicy.
No. I wrote, she's a mood, and I think I might be her. Because she's just over it. She's like, you need to pay up front. I'm hot. Go to your room.
Okay, the women we see in this film, it is her and Janette.
Yep.
Do we see? Oh, I guess maybe the woman who gives him his luggage later.
Oh, yeah. And the dream girl.
And
but
Robin,
yes, yeah. Yes, Robin. But okay, imagine being a woman in this town. No. So I would probably be a little cantankerous as well.
This whole vibe was very Aliens 3, and I wanted no part of it.
Oh, yes.
Prison Planet.
Right? And I was like, how do we get out of here? I need you all to run. And they were like, no, I'm fine here. And I was like, are you, though? Are you sure?
Well, that's literally the whole premise of the film, though, right? Is like, you are trapped in this fucking town. And I feel like we're going to get some listeners who are going to quibble with the fact that we're covering this and say, like, oh, this is really just like an Outback drama. There's no real horror here. I, like you, Trace, had so much anxiety because this is like a terrible dream where you are trying to get away from something and you cannot. Like, everything just brings you back to where you started. And this town is a fucking nightmare. Like, that's where the anxiety and the fear comes from, is the idea that these people are just trapped here.
Well, and I think it goes back to a conversation that, Sharai and I have had multiple times about, straight cis white men don't know how scary they are. Just existing.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You know what's... So I saw this tweet the other day, and it was really enlightening. It was a woman tweeting, and she was like, do you think men ever sit in a boardroom meeting and they think to themselves, wow, there's a lot of men in here? Like, because that's what women do, right?
Right? I literally... Oh my God, that sends me. No,
and insert any marginalized group, right? Like, it's women, it's people of color, it's queers. It's like, am I the only person in here? Do I have any allies? Also, where's the exit in case I need to get the fuck out of here?
Yes.
Exactly. And then, of course, everybody's like, oh, that person was being difficult. It's like, were they being difficult, or were they the only person in the room that did not have your identities?
Correct.
That's the thing. I mean, even me. I mean, look, I in my day job, I have not a reputation, but I'm not the warmest. I'm not the warm. I don't put up with bullshit. Like I'm not the warmest person, but it's also because I'm like, and I don't want to like blame it. Well, I grew up queer, so I have these defense mechanisms in place because obviously I know everyone I work with, but it just kind of primed me, to be kind of a bitch. But also, going back to if anyone quibbles with classifying this as horror, you can take it up with Shudder's team because it is on Shudder.
There we go.
They have it listed as psychological horror, and I can pick that up, especially for it being the 70s when they were figuring out what that term really meant. Right. Because like you have your Hitchcocks and things, but it was all very much the Wild Wild West, and so us getting this like almost Twilight Zone purgatory vibe from this. It's very psychological horror in the 70s. Like, yeah, it's what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So John puts down his bags. He ends up going out to a crowded bar, presumably for either a drink or for dinner. And immediately, this is that sense, right? Like, he walks in, they yell at him to shut the door. He's trying to make his way through the crowd. They will not move. Like, he is an outsider and immediately labeled as such, to the point where he can't get a drink, he can't negotiate the space. The testosterone is overpowering, but also I did see a number of people say this feels like a gay bar because it's all men.
And they are close, and they are sweaty, and they are rubbing up against each other.
And this is like the pre-Christmas gathering, right? So everybody has the time off. They are all drinking. Right. We have stubbies everywhere. In case people don't know, that's the short little beer that they're drinking.
Okay.
I was like, what's this?
I kept forgetting that it was almost Christmas time. And I was like, why is... Oh, right. It's Christmas time in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Holiday horror. This is, in a way, kind of like a morality tale, right? It's He needs to learn to appreciate what he actually has in Tabunda because he could be in Yaba.
Oh. Like, Yaba is definitely the Lubbock, Texas. And I wanted him to leave. I felt afraid for him the second he rolled in. I was like, oh no, honey.
Yeah. This is the dark parts of wherever you live, be it state, province, whatever. You're just like, oh, this is not the place I wanted to end up in overnight.
And what's so interesting is that, speaking as people of color, as marginalized communities, every one of us can think of one or multiple of those areas. And I don't, if I'm talking to a straight white cis man, I don't think he has that same thought or that same vocabulary.
Yeah, like I remember in grad school when those of us who never got like any of the respect that everybody else was supposed to get were starting to get upset about it. Like we had this one white guy who's like from Alabama, and he was just really upset that we were all talking about his privilege, and he felt really put out by that. And I was like, oh, boo-hoo. You talk over me all the fucking time. Like, because he was always that kid to be like, let me into this for her. And I was like, I have my own mouth, and it usually works, and I can usually say what I'm trying to think. Why are you inserting yourself about like being a black playwright or whatever it is that has nothing to do with you and any identity you have? And so it was a really great day of healing for me when he was like, I'm just tired of talking about my privilege. And then I like tortured him for a half an hour. So yeah.
Well, speaking of torture, let's get to the first of several interrogations that John will have to go through. So he is questioned by a new character. I wrote sheriff, but he may just be a police officer in this town. So this is Jacques Crawford, who is played by Chips Rafferty.
I kind of like it for this, especially because he has, like, the police officer role. And that's why I see a lot of, like, the high school football players ending up in their lives. And so, yeah.
Yeah, because he is definitely a personality, right? You know, he starts asking John who he is, where he's from, because they very immediately identify him as an outsider in this town. And at one point he says, you know, he wants John to just down these beers as fast as possible. But when he goes to get him another one, you see the crowd part like it is the fucking Red Sea for this dude. And that just sent chills down my spine when I was watching this, because I thought, they are scared of this guy. What is this guy going to get up to?
Yeah.
Newsflash, not that much, because John just makes his own trouble. Everybody just empowers him to make bad decisions in this movie.
I don't think that John is an unlikable character. He's definitely flawed. But there are times where I'm just like, dude, stop.
Yeah, like, John needs to look out for himself because he is a fucking idiot.
Yes. Yes. 100% yes.
Well, he's a little entitled, too.
But that is also his privilege, like you said, Sharai. You know, he's used to being able to kind of walk into situations and handle them, and here he is suddenly very out of his depth, and he does not handle it well.
I was about to say something. Oh my god, it's in my notes somewhere, but it was like the discontent is a privilege of the well-to-do. And I was like, I just saw that in a movie somewhere, and it was this one.
Yeah, that's what Doc tells him.
But it's literally true, because he can just, like, go to some new place and just get drunk with a band and know people take care of him. And it works out for him for most of the movie. Like, literally for most of the movie, somebody's like, let's get him home. Let's get him some more alcohol. He's standing up again. And so I'm just like, what is this privilege? That's not something that is afforded to, like, a lot of people. To just go somewhere new and just, like, get shit-faced and fall down and know it'll be fine when you wake up.
Yeah.
So this is where the reveal about Grant's situation comes out. He does not want to be in Tabunda, and he kind of gets read for it by Crawford, who's kind of like, oh, you're a bit sly, aren't you? Like, he gets a dressing down for his privilege right here and now, but Jock still likes him. So he talks a lot about how Yaba is a great place to live, but also we get this ominous proclamation, it's not an easy place to leave. And John Grant makes a joke about it and says, oh, well, you know, if you die, I guess that's one way to get out of here. And you're just like, I honestly thought he was going to die at the end of this film. I did not think he was going to make it.
There's a
alive.
lot of indications that he should have died.
Yes.
But as Trent says, we'll talk about it.
Choices were made, and I have questions.
So many questions.
Yeah, I didn't finish watching the 2017 miniseries, but I kind of wanted to, just to see if it ended with him dying. Because that feels like the more authentic ending.
It has its own Wikipedia page.
Okay, Trace, you investigate. The rest of us will continue on. All right, so there's a brief moment where everybody pauses to, yes, commemorate these fallen soldiers, because we are coming up on Anzac Day. And did you guys get a bit of a cult vibe? Like, I know it's about respecting fallen soldiers and respecting people for the sacrifices that they have made for the country. But to me, it was very like, oh...
It's like, would you like to join him next, sir?
I was very uncomfortable. Like, I was definitely like, okay, he's hit a cult town, and that's what we're going to do here. And it did not go exactly that way, but I can also see this sort of being like, this town has their own situation, whether or not we call it a cult or not.
Right, in a way, I think it's like a cult of masculinity.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yes. So eventually Crawford ends up taking John to a restaurant so that he can get him a steak for dinner. And in the back of this place, we see that there is some very active gambling going on. And this is what Grant calls a nice, simple-minded game, because he's being condescending. And this is our introduction to 2-Up. So Grant does not partake initially. He eats his steak, and this is where he meets Doc Tyden, who is played by The one and only Donald Pleasence.
It was so funny. So my husband did not watch this with me, but I told him, I was like, yeah, there's like some gay stuff with Donald Pleasence in this movie, apparently. And he walks out and he's like, that looks like Donald Pleasence. And I was like, I just told you that. And he goes, I know you said that, but in my mind, I was picturing Donald Sutherland.
Wow.
That would have been a different movie.
That would have been the Canadian version of this movie. Yeah.
Also, by the way, he does shoot himself in the miniseries, but Joe, you're going to fucking love this. Flashbacks reveal that Doc did not take advantage of John, but instead ensured his safety during his stupor.
Oh.
That makes no sense because the sex scene between them is way more graphic.
So I knew nothing about this movie because I don't like to know things beforehand because you come in and you prejudge stuff. And so I knew nothing. But like the second Mr. Dr. Loomis, Donald Pleasence showed up, I was like, these two are going to fuck. And so,
oh, really?
Yeah. No, because it was there. And the way he was always in his space and the way he was always trying to like piss next to him.
He is shirtless a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
I had never needed to see Dr. Loomis's nipples, but I guess that I spent 2 hours with them, and that's just something I have to live with.
Michael!
I shot him 7 times.
Look at my nipples, Michael!
But yeah, no, I was not ready for Donald Pleasence to show up, and I was not ready to see him run around and just be wild in the outback for an hour and 20 minutes.
He is wild in this movie. Like, he is serving mad Dr. Loomis, but it's the whole performance.
Maybe this is Dr. Loomis's, like, prequel. It's the origin story.
Yeah. He's looking at one of these kangaroos he's about to kill, being like, the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
That's why I had to cut off its testicles, yes. So, one of the things that I think is most fascinating, which I admit I did not do a ton of research on this movie, mostly because I knew there were 4 of us and we were going to do a great job of it, but I don't think it's insignificant that this is a doctor, because everyone else that we see in this town seems to have no job except for Crawford. So the only real professional and the person who is like trained, like educated, is Doc. So Doc is a kind of dark counterpoint to John Grant. It's like, this is what you could become. And that's also why, as soon as I saw them, like you, Sharai, I thought, oh, these two are going to fuck because they're just opposite versions of each other.
Exactly. There was a tension immediately. And I'm happy about it that nobody seems to have a job, because I was like, people are buying this stranger steaks and keeping him full of beer, and I don't understand how the money's happening.
Yeah.
Because literally nobody has a job.
Yeah, in the miniseries, they do this whole like, oh, we're drug producers. So that's kind of the seedy underbelly of the town, is that everybody's getting rich off of drugs. To which I was like, boring.
Well, yeah, because I mean, they clearly have money, right? Because they're gambling it all away. But I almost like it's like a thing where it's like, yeah, it is an unknowing cult where they just bring people in, make them lose their money, and keep them there, and then they're stuck there forever.
And also, if the money never leaves town, then basically they're just recirculating each other's money.
Yes.
So, like, when you win big at 2-ups, you're just going to lose it the next week, and somebody else gets rich for a week.
They keep spotting each other for everything. So even if you lose all your money, don't worry, you'll get it back at some point.
Yeah, there's a line later by Doc Titan who, when he says, you can basically live here without any money. And I just thought, that's also very creepy and ominous, but everything points to that fact because everyone is so generous and hospitable, right? Like, they will take you in, they will ply you with beer, they may sexually assault you, ? But overall, like, you could make things happen in the town of Yaba because everyone just seems to carry on.
Yeah, like the few times he did try to say no up top, somebody would yell at him and say, I didn't say you're going to buy your own, I'm going to buy you one, down it. I was like, what kind of after-school special is this?
But that's, he calls it the aggressive hospitality, and that is exactly what it is.
Yes. He also thinks that everyone in town is very stupid because he has not been put in his place yet, and he thinks that he's better, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, people are just, they are unwilling to take no for an answer, especially when it comes to drinking. And I think, again, that plays into the "that's not us" criticism that one guy threw at the screen, because this is not a very flattering portrait of both the drinking culture in Australia, but also the kind of like narrow, small town mindedness. Like, these people don't come off as people that you want to spend a lot of time with.
Right, no.
I will say that the drinking aspect of it made me wonder what the writer's relationship to alcohol was. Because, like, I'm not gonna lie, I love a great drink. I will drink almost any day I can. But I know that some of my friends who are in the arts are always talking about how they feel pressured to always drink because everything surrounds drinking. It's like after the show movie, let's go to the bar. Let's go get drinks talking to this director. Let's go do that. And so, like, when they're in recovery, they're just like, I don't know how to be social anymore because, like, my entire career has been in bars or drinking or whatevering. And so, like, when you take that away, people don't want to talk to you because they're getting drunk and they're like, I don't want to bring you with me if you're, like, a baby in recovery. And so it made me wonder that bit of it. But I also didn't know if they were using alcohol as just, like, a commentary on excess and people who have privilege. And so... yeah, there's stuff in this movie that I would like to unpack, but also it's this movie. So I'm like, okay, could we pick or choose a couple?
Yeah, because it also felt like a way to get our main character, John, to not just lose his inhibitions, but lose his mind, essentially. Like, how many times did we, or I don't know about y'all, but I felt like missing memory as it was like cutting back and forth in some of these really drunk scenes to him, like what actually did happen. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I think it ultimately becomes a saying in the film that it's hard to get out of Yaba is not just because John loses his money and then he doesn't have a way out. It's like he's so drunk all the time that you don't even get a sense of what time passing is like. And I think that plays into some of the fear, right? It's that he's losing his inhibitions, he's going down this dark spiral, but also he is just unable to keep control of himself because these people ultimately do not have his best interest in mind, even though they are being generous to a fault.
But it also makes me wonder what each of them is expecting to get from him.
Yeah, and we don't really get that because this is John's story through and through, and because it's predominantly men, we don't get a lot of actual candid conversation. Like Doc Tyden is really the only person who reveals anything,
or even
themselves.
like emotionally opens up at all. Like, I don't know, did y'all find that frustrating, or did y'all just kind of go along with that? I mean, sorry, not that he's the one that did it, but that no one else really is. I mean, they're characters, but they're not.
They're stock characters, it felt like. And it just felt like, for all the characters not having any complexity other than, like you said, John and Doc, that made it feel longer to me. You know, I was like, okay, if you're going to do that, make that a choice, so that's great. But really, does it need to be longer than 90 minutes?
Well, but I will say, though, and again, we're going back into anxiety-inducing movies, like, once shit starts hitting the fan, the movie already starts feeling longer to me, because when I feel anxious, time moves a lot slower. So I get what you're saying, even about the first half, but it's weird. Again, when the credits rolled, I was like, wow, the first half seemed a lot faster than the second half, even though usually it's the opposite, I feel like.
I felt that because, like, the first half, we were trying to figure out what is happening. And then, like, the second half, we're like, well, clearly these two are gonna fuck, and this town is some sort of a weird thing that nobody's leaving for whatever reason. And they're all broken people, and I don't know why they're not leaving. And so you go from, like, easing into it to being stuck with them. And I think that's what slowed it all down. And that's what it's like, let's get out of here. And even the way they handle things, like, every scene after, like, he meets Doc feels like it goes on for at least 5-7 minutes. The kangaroo bit, maybe 10-15.
Oh, God.
No, the we'll talk about it, but I think that kangaroo bit is 10 minutes long. I really think it is.
It made me so uncomfortable that I had to actually Google it on the spot, which, again, I don't like knowing things while I'm watching a movie, but I'm like, this feels like I'm watching, like, a kangaroo snuff movie, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Let me get onto the Google, and the Wikipedia was like, you are a bitch, and I was like, okay.
Congratulations.
Called it.
Well, put a pin in that until we get there. So let's jump back into the plot.
All right. So Grant eventually tries his hand at 2-ups, and he has a run of luck, mostly because he's been listening to stats that Doc Tyden has been compiling, so he knows which up to bet on, and he does excessively well, to the point where, like, we get this one fleeting moment of optimism where he grabs the money and he runs out and he, like, practically clicks his heels in the air. He's so excited, gets all the way back to the room and realizes if he makes one more bet and wins, he will have that $1,000 to get out of the bond.
And that is where Trace, in his seat, goes, No!
Fucking idiot. We can all see what's going to happen, but it does take its time, right? Like, he comes back and he decides he's going to be the spinner. He throws it incorrectly. And then we do get this really gorgeous shot where when he does throw it correctly, he throws it into the light and he gets almost dazed. And it reminded me, Sharai, I think you cued us that in the 70s, there were a lot of movies that were psychological thrillers of this kind of ilk. And this shot in particular reminded me of like, oh, it's a character having a Freudian moment where we might see a repressed memory or something's going to happen. Like Trace, it reminded me of Tenebrae, where it was like, oops, I secretly murdered that lady on the beach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually some really fun editing. I mean, fun. It's, I think, really inventive editing in this movie, specifically when he starts getting drunk and we start getting those blackout flashes. I think that's all really well done.
Yeah. So, naturally, he fucks this up and he does lose nearly everything. And you're like, okay, well, he's lost his money, but he's still okay. He just needs to leave now. And then he cashes his check. So that means he now has no safety net and he loses that as well. And then I did think, again, the editing shifts paces here, so it does get a little bit faster, but also we see a different perspective. It's like the veneer has come off of these men who are in the gambling room and they look super aggressive. They're practically foaming at the mouth. It is a really uncomfortable space to be in. And of course, he fucking loses the check money, so we just smash cut to him waking up nude and also completely broke and fucked.
And this is when we get the full frontal, which again, casually done, not gratuitous. He just walks to the window and we see his dead.
Yep. It's good stuff. Good stuff.
I want more of that because we just don't get that. We
From the men in this movie?
like in all the movies. Like I just because it's always like this naked woman running around from the intruder and this guy who's wearing like pants and a tank top behind her because they were having sex, but he kept his clothes on. And I'm like, that's not fair. Like, you have a scene partner. Either everybody's naked or nobody's naked. We're going to do that now.
So he ends up checking out, and then he gets to stare wistfully as he watches his plane take off, which is a bit
love
of a
that
fuck
detail.
You. We get an ominous shot of a Santa, and then he makes his way into a bar to get out of the sun, because he's just walking around this town with nowhere to go, no money, and his suitcases. So he goes in, and in the bar, he attracts the attention of Tim Hines, who is played by Al Thomas. And this guy is a bit of a firecracker. Like, it's hard to tell if he's either the mayor of this town, because you could see it, or he could be the town drunk, because you could see that too. But he's short. He's wearing, like, the short shorts with the tall socks. And he will not take no for an answer when he wants to buy John a drink.
This is the moment where I was like, this man really is in danger. Because, like, it's very unsettling when somebody offers to buy you a drink and you say no and they lose their shit. That's something that's usually something that I used to experience in the before the COVID times when I could go to bars.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, I'm good. And all of a sudden it's a scene. And you're like, I didn't want a scene. I just wanted you to not be in my space. And now how do we de-escalate this? But again, like, our character is making bad choices. So he's like, fine, I'll down it and let this angry man buy me more alcohol. Yeah. And I'm like, that is not the way to go.
Beer has never looked more unappealing to me in a movie.
Same.
Trace doesn't drink beer, so this movie was probably a big trial for you, wasn't it?
There's one of the IMDb factoids in the trivia section is like there are 108 shots of people drinking beer in this movie or something.
Wow. Not surprising.
Like, it also sent me that this man was drinking beer and or whiskey with tomato juice, and I don't know if that's a delicacy or something. What is that?
No, because you can get oh my god, like a chelada, or maybe it's a michelada, but it's like it's a Bloody Mary, but like instead of vodka, it's beer.
Right.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. He said tomato juice, and I, for some reason, even though I call Bloody Mary salads, I just did not register.
I know what you mean, though. No, because I'm a big salad. I have to have a salad before every single meal. But if I'm getting a Bloody Mary, that is my salad.
It is. And depending on where you go, it's a full meal.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, it's filling. It's filling.
In New Orleans, there's like bacon and crawdads and like leaves and like celery. And so you can order like 2 of those and be like, I had a full meal. I'm going to take a nap.
Look, I get that. I am totally fine with 3 olives, a stick of celery, and just my Bloody Mary mix in the vodka.
Listen, I love a couple of spicy pickles, like 3 garlic olives, a little bit of Tabasco, and yeah, it's a salad.
Yeah, there you go.
I feel like the two of you should collaborate on some kind of Caesar cookbook or something like that.
Oh my god. A tour of musicals with a menu.
There we go. Sell that to the Alamo Drafthouse and you're golden.
Listen.
There you go.
Why not? It'll just be like, for this musical, you'll want 3 salads. Wink, wink.
And Trent and I are over there eating our Caesar salads like, wait, did we fuck this up?
You had one job.
No. See, you can make a Caesar salad in your Bloody Mary by mixing, like, having anchovy puree in the Bloody Mary mix.
Yeah, gross.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my god, you wouldn't even see it.
Listen, one of the few things that Lubbock, Texas got right for me was they had a place that would put candied bacon in the Bloody Mary, and I didn't know candied bacon was a thing. And so, like, when you're done with your salad, there's like a thick hunk of bacon that's like sweet waiting for you, and it's been soaking up the salad. And so you're just like, oh, it's a bonus meal. It's like a dessert in the bottom of my salad.
Oh, I've seen Bloody Marys with sliders in them.
Oh, no.
What?
Sharai, are you from Lubbock, or did you just visit Lubbock?
I was there for grad school, so it was 3 years of haboobs and sadness.
At Tech?
Yeah.
Oh, my husband grew up in Lubbock, so that's why I ask.
Oh.
so we go back often to see his family.
I'm sorry.
No, so actually that's the town where it's like, that is your one city in the middle of absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So anyway.
It's a little yabba. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, eventually John gets into it. They play snooker. They're drinking the whole time. And then John takes him home. And you think, okay, we're going to get some food into John because he has not seemingly eaten anything since that steak, but he's down on beers like they're going out of style.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we're introduced to, I wrote in my notes, passive-aggressive and or bored daughter Janette, who is played by Sylvia Kay. I'm interested, what were your impressions of Janette?
She did not want to be at this party, and I did not blame her.
Fair.
Oh, she seemed over it. She wanted to get her some dick and go to bed.
Clear goals. I love seeing a woman written with clear goals. And she was like, here's what I'm here for.
I will say, I wasn't expecting her to be horny.
Right.
So up until she started unbuttoning her dress, I was like, oh, like, I feel like it's very rare. Even today, maybe not today, but like especially in the 70s, where you see a woman this kind of take charge with her sexuality.
She was ready. It was very uncomfortable because she got down on the ground and she was just like on it, and like the way she was like arching her back and like undoing her buttons and like throwing her head around. Mm-hmm. And I was like, he's not even near you. You need to at least wait. Like what are you doing? What was in your beer?
Let's be real. Before this, she'd only had Doc, so like she was needing some variety.
Oh no, I think we're meant to read that she has had nearly every man in town.
Same.
Yes.
Same.
Like that's why, because Dick gets rapey towards her, but I believed that she had already fucked him and was like, I don't need you anymore, and I'm moving on.
Yeah, like she has sampled the town.
She's like a Pokemon hunter, and she was trying to collect them all, and she got them all. I will say that I was really confused because, again, this is a weird movie. And so I thought Doc was her dad. And I was like, did Dr. Loomis just screw his daughter? Because if so, I don't know if I can do this anymore.
You don't like a good bit of incest in your horror?
It was too far. But also, because this is this movie, it could have perfectly been what I saw. And I was just like, please no. Please.
I would have batted an eye, but I wouldn't have batted an eye had it showed up in this movie.
Yeah, same. I will say, I know we've made a number of comparisons of what this film sort of reminds us of, from Calvaire to Twilight Zone to other things, but one of the things that I was really taken with is that this also reminds me of our series on rural horror that we did, Trace, for the Patreon, because even though I don't think any of these people are actually nefarious, like, no one is actually out to get John. He gets himself into bad situations because he doesn't know how to extricate himself. But, like, these people don't necessarily mean him harm in the way that people conventionally do in horror films. And yet, everything about this is city person who has come to the rural town that they do not understand, thinks that they're better, and gets themselves completely fucked over. Like, this is Wrong Turn Australia minus the incest and the rape.
Very much. It reminds me of a Kinney I knew when I was a journalist student many, many moons ago. And he thought that he was like God's gift to the English department. And he was always like talking down to people, and he always was taking himself way too importantly. And if you made a joke about him, it was a whole situation, and there was a lot of drama about it. And I was like, good sir. And he gives me a lot of the same energy as that Kinney. And I think that's maybe part of the reason I was like, I don't know if I like this character.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, you can read this as, oh, it's really threatening because this is a town full of men, lots of testosterone, lots of masculinity. What's going to happen? It feels like a powder keg. And yet you could also read this as, oh, we're following an asshole around with a bunch of people who, yeah, maybe they're a little bit simple. Maybe they're heavily reliant on alcohol for fun and games, but also he comes into town and acts like he's fucking better than everyone, and then he gets himself fucked up. Like, this movie is a bit of a morality tale in that regard, and in some ways, yeah, it's hard to root for John because he is a bit of a privileged asshole.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're hanging out at Tim's place. Janette is, as you said, Sharai, she's over it, not interested in doing any of this stuff, and they end up drinking so much that they pass out, and then they're awoken by the arrival of Dick, who is played by Jack Thomas, as well as Joe, who is played by Peter Whittle. And I wrote in my notes, they're kind of a couple of good old boys, because they show up, they get the party started, but also there's nothing to them. Like, they're just there to have a good time. John immediately tries to leave. He does not want to be here for this anymore. And when he says he wants to leave, they look at him in disgust. So
why you want to do that?
Basically, the party is here. Why would you want to leave? So he ends up outside with Janette. She gives him a little bit of a rundown where she's like, I'm kind of the only pretty girl in town, which means I also can't leave because I've got nowhere to go. And it seems like they have a connection, even though he has talked about his girlfriend, Robin, who he wants to go to London with. And she's like, cool, please keep telling me about your fucking girlfriend.
But okay, when he shows her the picture of Robin, it is a long take where she looks at the picture discerningly, looks up at him like, what? Looks at the picture again, looks at him, and then goes, Robin. Huh. Like, girl. So again, going my queer reading here, she's like, you got this, bitch? Come on, this ain't your girlfriend. This is your beard.
Is this the photo that came with the wallet when you bought it?
Yes. So I'm going to test this theory, and let's go outside for a minute.
Right?
Yeah, so we do have this attempted sex scene, and it obviously doesn't go particularly well because you can read it one way, which is the literal way that John has not had any food. He's been drinking voraciously for the entire day, and he throws up. Or you could read it as he tries to make himself have a heterosexual encounter with this woman, and he can't even go through with it, and he throws up.
Yep. Which is why he went back to drinking right after.
Yeah.
Be with those men.
I do like that when we come back to the party, we see that Doc has arrived. I mean, technically Doc had arrived before they left to go and try to have sex, but Doc is very much the life of the party. He's doing the equivalent of keg stands as he is reciting medical terminology. It's quite impressive.
I don't even know. Like, Doc is... I don't know if it's because Donald Pleasence is playing Doc, or if it's because it's just such a character that is just off the wall, but I could never look away even though I wanted to multiple times.
Oh, he's fascinating, for sure.
Yeah.
So John ends up, yes, drinking way too much at this point, and we get this great spinning montage of drunken flashes, and then he passes out. And when he awakens, the film, this is really, I feel like, when we shift into the back half of the film, and things start to either become repetitive or they're dragging out because he is, like, ensconced in this town. Like, he is not going to get out of here, because now, suddenly... he's in Doc's cabin, which is in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't even have a latrine inside. It looks like it hasn't been cleaned in a very long time. And we get to learn a little bit more about Doc. So he actually is a doctor, but he is an alcoholic. So he was basically booted out of Sydney, came to Yaba, found that people treated him with kindness, and now he doesn't accept cash payments. He basically lives off of beer and presumably pills, which he has in that little bag of his.
And grab that kangaroo meat that he makes for a hangover cure.
Correct, yes.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
They eat kangaroo in Australia, right?
Oh, yeah. It's very common. It's almost a cheap meat.
Well, because I think, isn't it because they have to use their legs so much, like it's like a very tender meat, right?
Yeah, it's very lean. It's very easy to overcook it, and it's not good if you do.
Oh, okay. On the bucket list.
It's tasty. It's kind of like the equivalent of lobster for people who live on the East Coast, where you're just like, yeah, if you were poor, you probably ate a lot of this because it was relatively easy to get for cheap.
Oh my god, whereas it's like $50 for a fucking lobster tail anywhere else you go.
Right.
Exactly. It's a delicacy. Yeah.
I know where I'm moving next.
Okay, so we also learn more about Janette, and this is where the doc basically insinuates that he and Janette have been fucking on the regular, and that he sees them as kindred spirits because she is aggressive and assertive about what she wants. And I think that this is an interesting progressive stance for the film. I guess there's a lot of traditional masculinity concerns in the film, but yeah, you know, as we've been talking about, Janette is a character who, even though she's not the most well-rounded, she's out there going after what she wants, and she's not afraid to ask for it.
This line I thought was very interesting. This is when I perked up a bit. Doc says, take Janette, for instance. Now, there's a very interesting biological case. If Janette were a man, she'd be arrested for rape.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, oh. And then we get they think Janette's a slut.
This is where I also wrote down some lines from this moment, because this moment was just so bizarre.
There's
after
a
everything
lot,
else. Yeah, because he's like, what's wrong with a woman taking a man because she feels like it? And I'm like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, sex is like eating. We do it because we have to. I'm like, okay. Man,
you lost me.
It was like whiplash, and I was like, what is Doc saying? Why is none of it making sense together?
I feel like Doc has a very kind of analytical approach to things. Like, I'm not going to apologize for something because I want to do it, because sex is a natural urge, right? Like, it's something that we as humans are driven to try to do. Whether or not that results in procreation depends on who you're attracted to. But I don't know. I thought it was funny that he's so like, what's the problem here? Like, why are you being such a Puritan about all of this? You should be like me because you're educated. And instead, John is just like, boo.
Edumacated.
Right?
I mean, of course, if we read John as queer, then he's going to be like, can we stop talking about Janette's sexual proclivities, please?
He's like, I'm a throw again.
Right.
Well, I do like the fact that he asked for water, and Doc was like, no, that's what you bathe yourself in. Have beer.
Have beer. Ugh.
I can't remember if I shared it on the Loved Ones episode. I wouldn't have shared it on the Boys in the Trees episode because that wouldn't have been appropriate for that film. But if you'll permit me a brief anecdote about Australian drinking culture.
Yes.
So my husband and I were having difficulty meeting people, so we ended up joining a kind of like over 30 group to do social activities. And the thing that we went on, because I like to drink, so we signed up for a kind of winery pub crawl thing. So we get on a bus with a group of strangers we've never met. They're all lovely, not unlike the people in Java, where they're very much like, we're going to have a great time. Let's get shit-faced today. Awesome. So this bus leaves to go to the wineries, which are like out of town, about an hour. It picks us up at like 8:30 in the morning, and everyone already has booze on the bus.
Yeah.
So my husband and I were like, oh, okay, you know, they're getting an early start. When these people see that we do not have booze, they're like, don't worry, we got you. We'll stop off so that you can get liquor at like a convenience store or wherever on the way. And we were like, no, we're fine. We're going to hit 5 wineries and there's a 6th at lunch if we wanted to partake in that. And they were like,
wait.
No. We'll get you booze. It's fine.
What time is the bus leaving if you're having a 6th winery at lunch?
No, like there's 5 on the tour, and then the middle one.
Oh, okay.
I was like, yes, but also, like, I feel like I would also want some. If you're going to be awake that early, you might as well be drinking. Like, I don't know why you wouldn't be pre-gaming. I'm with these people.
Oh my God.
Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. We were like, oh, these people really do like their alcohol. And I don't think that they were unusual in that regard. Like, Australia is a country that is well known for its drinking culture. And I think that can be perfectly fine, but it can also, yeah, like if you're not prepared to handle your liquor or if it's just not your speed, that can be a problem.
You definitely have to know when to say when and go home. Because, like, after a certain age, getting, like, shit-faced in public is just not cute.
Right.
And, like, nobody wants to vomit anymore either. Like, once you find that threshold, you're just like, okay, so I could drink up to almost there, and then we're done. But, like, what they're doing here, this is a sport. This is, like, Australia was going for the gold in this movie, and I was like, oh, hot damn.
Yeah, for real.
Well, it's funny that you say sport, because this is when Joe and Dick arrive so that we can go on a kangaroo hunt. And, it feels a little bit like Dukes of Hazzard for a couple of minutes as we're driving through the outback. I don't know how they don't wreck this car, because they're driving over trees. They are, like...
It's just a shrubbery.
It's a lot of shrubbery, yeah, but it's impressive driving, and we're shooting at kangaroos. Doc takes off the testicles of some of them, and we end up at Stubbs' bar, which is in the middle of nowhere. Stubb is played by Tex Foot.
This is the point, by the way, where I messaged Joe and I was like, it wasn't that bad. Like, okay, because we see them run over one with a car, and we see a dog get one, but, like, I was expecting more gore. Mm-hmm. Little did I know.
Yeah, so we spend some time at Stubbs, and it seems like John is actually finding his rhythm, because everybody has a gun now. We shoot at a fox, and John actually ends up being the one to kill it, or maybe give it a fatal blow. And you're like, okay, cool, so we've done the kangaroo sequence. And then night falls, and we're now more drunk. We've all got guns. We get back into the car, and we do a second round of kangaroo hunting, and this feels endless.
Okay, we begin with a montage. I mean, it's not really a montage because we're not editing, but we're just seeing, like, here's a dark screen with a kangaroo. Oh, it gets shot. Dark screen with a kangaroo. It gets shot. I was kind of like, oh, yeah, this is a lot. Then we, like, hover on one after it's shot as it's just kind of, like, twitching on the ground. Mm-hmm. And then... what do we get, Joe?
Yeah, so we end this sequence in two ways. So Joe ends up boxing and then eventually slitting the throat of an adult kangaroo who has also already been shot and is wounded.
Yeah.
And then they challenge John to do the same. And Doc says, don't do it. It's not worth it. And John is very drunk, so he does, except that they give him a baby kangaroo who has also already been shot. And then we have to watch John try to slit its throat, but he can't quite do it. So he just ends up resorting to stabbing it to death.
But, like, after a very, like, he's, like, grabbing its tail, pulling it around. Like, it is... it's rough. And so I'm going to read y'all two things. One is the producer's note at the end of this movie, and the other is something else. So the producer's note says... the hunting scenes depicted in this film were taken during an actual kangaroo hunt by professional licensed hunters. For this reason, and because the survival of the Australian kangaroo is seriously threatened, these scenes were shown uncut after consultation with the leading animal welfare organizations in Australia and the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. Let me read you this other thing. Mm-hmm. Filming this, the hunt lasted several hours and gradually wore down the filmmakers. According to cinematographer Brian West, the hunters were getting really drunk and they started to miss. It was becoming an orgy of killing, and we, meaning the crew, were getting sick of it. Kangaroos hopped about helplessly with gun wounds and trailing intestines.
Oh my god.
Yep. Producer George Willoughby fainted after seeing a kangaroo splattered in particularly spectacular fashion. The crew orchestrated a power failure in order to end the hunt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I am not going to lie. I picked up my phone during that part. It was like, what's going on Facebook right now?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a little break.
Yeah.
Here's the thing for me. So, my family's from Louisiana. I have uncles who would go hunting. I wouldn't really go with them, but, like, I did on one hunting trip with my uncle. He would shoot ducks, and, you know, his Labrador would go and bring the bodies back and whatever. So, I got to witness him, you know, like, do what you do to ducks after you kill them, which is, you know, you feather them, you gut them, you decapitate them, and I chased one of my cousins around with the duck head and threw it at her. It was really fun. But, oh my God. But it was already dead. Like, I wasn't seeing this duck wounded and having to get killed, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's so with the beginning, with the chase, I was like, okay, this isn't that bad. It is seeing these alive kangaroos that are sometimes suffering, sometimes fighting for their lives. Yeah. it's not even the killing. It is them fighting for their lives. It's the hardest part for me.
It was the hardest thing I've seen, like, on film, because, like, you knew immediately these are real animals being shot in front of you.
Yeah.
And for them to be like, well, we left it all in and we did this and I'm a vegetarian, so it's fine. That's just not the flex he thinks it is. To be like, we hired hunters. Like, that still makes you an asshole. I'm sorry. I have a lot of enemies. I'm a Gemini. If I pay you to go beat one of them up, I still had them beat up. I can't be like, well, I paid a professional. Like, it's...
I mean, like, hunting is, I don't want to say natural, but, like, it is something that happens. It is. Kangaroo meat is eaten in Australia, so they're gonna do it. But this just seemed a bit excessive.
This was mean.
It seemed like this is not hunting out of necessity. This is hunting out of... And not even sport, out of just entertainment.
Yeah,
which, I mean, what is sport? But, like, you know what I mean.
No, there's a difference. Yes, I get it.
Well, and this is, I think, the sequence that ends up earning this film its place on the list of Ozploitation films, because really, a lot of the rest of the film, I don't want to say mundane, but it is more psychological and ominous, whereas this is... It truly does feel exploitative, right? Like, it goes on for too long, it is grueling to endure, and specifically when we know that this is real, like, I think you could watch this and not know, but you would figure it out pretty quickly. And if we saw a couple of them get shot and just be dead, it would be okay, but it's watching them suffer endlessly for like 10 minutes. Yeah. It just feels like you're not making a point anymore, you're just making us go through it.
Right, it added nothing to the story.
It didn't. Like, I never needed to see kangaroos getting shot and falling and, like, fighting and struggling. I just never needed to see that. It felt like it was being done for shock value as opposed to being part of a story or being part of something.
Well...
Because you've established these are gross dudes. You've established this is, like, a very hyper-masculine situation. Mm-hmm. It's a frat house. And so, like, we don't need to see you, like, hurt animals in real time.
But here's the thing, and that's where I'm going to go back to this whole that's not us, yes, mate, it is conversation. I'm not saying this is like a documentary approach, but again, do I think something like this has been done before?
Right.
Like, not on film, but just in real life? Yes. Oh, yeah. So if this writer and director, and again, the writer of the book, because this is in the book, is trying to document, like, a realistic portrayal of what a drunken kangaroo hunt looks like, I mean, I get it, but again, I get, but we're not just portraying it, right? It is real kangaroos that is happening. So I see both sides. I don't want to say I disapprove of this, but I don't approve of it either. This is a rough one for me.
And one thing I would say, just to push back on the whole, like, well, I hired professionals. Well, your professionals are getting shit-faced.
Yeah.
And that, to me, even I don't care if I hired the best wedding singer in the world. If by the end of the night you're shit canned, you're not professional.
Right? Yeah. And there are multiple ways of depicting fake violence. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a horror movie. Like, surely they know how to depict fake violence or how to talk about it in a way that'll get you the same results. And I feel like there were so many ways we could have done this that it would have, like, gotten this point across as opposed to turning off the audience. Because I was turned off.
They do not have the budget to make a bunch of fake kangaroos with fake blood.
Maybe. But also then maybe you need to evaluate, okay, how much do we need this in here? What is the cost that we're willing to pay to make sure that this sequence gets in here?
Well, okay, so then let's ask this question. What is the point of this scene?
I don't know.
I think you do, Trent, because you and Sharai both said, you know, we know that these are bad dudes. This is frat house behavior. I think our struggle is that this is real animals and we feel like it goes on for a gratuitously long period of time. Like, I think if we could have done this in a slightly more tasteful fashion and made it more expedient, it would have been okay. We maybe wouldn't have liked it. It wouldn't have been our favorite part of the film, but it's the realism mixed with the length that makes it not good.
I get that. And because I agree with you that the first scene was fine. I think we got the idea of what they were trying to do from the first scene. The second scene just feels like, oh, let me go further to get some more shock value.
But how did you feel during... I'm not defending this. I'm just talking through this. But how did you feel during that first scene compared to how you feel during the second scene? And I think the point is to make you feel the way you felt in the second scene.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Like, and again, I'm not saying, oh, that's good, like, let's kill the kangaroos, but I do think the point of this is to make you upset, is to make you very sad. I don't know if this is the case, but I also think that it's kind of like, I don't know, shining a light on this kind of shitty behavior that some portions of Australian men were doing in the 70s and maybe even still doing today. So the guy that's like, that's not us. I mean, maybe that was a guy who has done this before who's like, I don't want people to know this about us.
Yeah, it's like the dark history.
I just feel as storytellers, there are ways of getting that across, especially because, like, this movie is inherently about, like, white cis men. And so, like, there are so many examples of them being awful in history. And so I feel like we could have done so many different things that didn't involve us watching actual animals catch bullets and fall down, and then people, like, finish the job. And because that was what it was. Like, if you want a kangaroo hunt, there are ways to do that. I'm not saying go to Party Store, but, like, there are ways for you to convey that to your audience, and we'll go with it. Because at the end of the day, we are making film, and a lot of the films are made of fake things. Like, they're not handing Jamie Lee Curtis real guns to go after Michael Myers. And so, like, you can do what you want to do, but also when you do something this out of pocket, like, it says a lot about you as a filmmaker, I just feel.
Well, okay, so and again, I'm going to reiterate, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. If this wasn't real animals, and you were watching this scene with fake kangaroos, they were doing it to something like, would it have the same effect for you?
It would tell me who these people were, yes. Mm-hmm. And I could then, like, rein it in and be focused on, like, these characters, this part of Australia. I might do some digging because we have the internet, so I could be like, is it really this awful? Are people really this kind of an asshole?
But would you, as a viewer, feel as distraught as you do watching real animals get killed, as opposed to if it was fake? Sorry, I'm not looking for a yes, or I'm not looking for any answer. I'm just like, I feel like I'm trying to feel like what this director is thinking with this.
I mean, we have whole websites dedicated to letting people know if the pets die in movies. Mm-hmm. And so I think that most audience members are empathetic enough where if it's a fake kangaroo or a real kangaroo, they're going to feel bad.
Yeah.
But, like, when you use real animals and you use them in this, like, sort of shitty way, it takes it away from the focus on the movie and it puts it on the focus on the director as a person. It's like it's almost like how I can't enjoy a Roman Polanski movie because I know too much about him and what the monster he is. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is like. And so, like, yeah, we could talk about Rosemary's Baby, but, like, it's not the same for me because I'm just like, I can't see it as what it was before I knew what I know. And so it's kind of mixing that into this art you're trying to give me. And so you're distracting from the art, and then I'm judging you as a person. Is what it is.
It's interesting because I get what you're saying 100%. I almost feel like a criminal psychologist sometimes because, like, I mean, any director, be it Polanski or someone else, you know, who's done illegal, horrible shit, it makes me reanalyze their movies, not in a way where, because I get it, you know, Sharai, you're saying, oh, that makes me just, like, not want to watch it because I can't get that out of my head, whereas I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm in the mind of this fucking psychopath watching a movie he made, and I want to see how he's putting his sick shit in this movie, but I wouldn't, like, put that on anyone else, right? Like, that's like I'm even, like, kind of nervous admitting that on the podcast because I'm like, ooh, but, like, again, to me, it's like psychoanalysis.
And I feel like similar to this film in this situation, this conversation we're having with a film like The Shining,
mm-hmm.
I have a really hard time. I do not enjoy that film because I actively feel like I am watching a human being be abused.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And not just, you know, acting like she's being abused. No, the person that I am watching on the screen is literally being abused in front of my eyes. And so I feel very similar to this as I do to that.
Well, and that's where we're entering snuff film territory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of me is like, maybe we should move on. Either that or I could try to explode the conversation if we want to.
Drop the bomb. Let's see.
Do it.
All right. So I'm hearing, I think, all reasonable arguments. I guess one of the things that I thought after this and having a similar negative reaction to it and being like, I really wish they would have just done it differently. But it is the 70s, right? I do think that's one of the things we have to kind of keep in mind is this would obviously not be done this way. Mm-hmm. But then I thought of that, like that producer's note at the end of the film and just how ineffectual it is. And I thought, oh, well, this is going to sound totally fucking awful, but what if I was somebody who said, oh, I'm really morally opposed to rape and I think it's absolutely terrible. I'm not going to film a fucking 10-minute rape sequence to be like, hey, did you know that rape is really bad? Like,
right.
I think it's, in a way, I think we almost excuse this because it is animals as opposed to people, but then we also have really bad reactions to animals dying. Like, in a way, I almost think that it would have been easier if they had been hunting humans instead of kangaroos in the scene. We all would have been like, oh, now it's just a horror film. Okay.
Exactly.
Joe, but in your rape analogy, are we filming actual rape or are we filming simulated rape?
Well, I mean, can you even imagine? I don't think either one would go down well, but then it's like, oh, okay, well, what if we're actually doing authentic depictions to really try to convince people this is bad? Like, that is not a good idea. That is taking it way too far.
For sure. I'm just thinking, I mean, again, like, the point of contention with this scene is that it's real kangaroos.
Yes, and I think that going back to your, like, we would react to it better if they were hunting humans. But that because I know, or at least I would hope that I would know, that these real humans weren't actually being murdered. Mm-hmm. Like they didn't actually die.
Yeah.
If they were like, it's like snuff films and those like films of people actually dying. I won't know. But like, yeah, I definitely would feel. Yeah, I think it's the idea that they are actually real creatures, real living beings that are dying in front of my eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like any other guy who takes a joke too fucking far. Because, like, again, had we used fake kangaroos, or we just discussed this kangaroo situation in a way where people felt the weight of it, and we felt oogie about these people, that's one thing. But to, like, take it that extra step, like Joe was saying, to be like, I'm so anti this that I supported it, so we have 10 minutes of it in this movie. It's just, I don't understand that rationale.
Well, and I think, too, when it comes to something like, again, like real violence, I think consent is a matter here. So, I mean, again, like, on a news program, they say, oh, we're about to warn you, the images you're about to see are shocking because it's real violence. It's real whatever the fuck they're about to show you. This movie doesn't have that. And again, we can get into a huge debate about like just content warnings in general, but I do subscribe to the belief that that warning maybe should have been at the front of this film instead of the end of it.
That is the other big question mark. Yeah, I was like, who are you benefiting having this at the end? You needed to give people the heads up so they could make an informed decision before.
Yeah, to me, having it at the end just makes it even more like these people who decided that were assholes. Because it's like, oh, hey, this movie you just watched, that disturbing scene that maybe you thought it was fake. It wasn't, bitch. It was real, and now you watched it. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Right? And it's hard to not know it's real, because, like, I've never been hunting. I eat a lot of meat, but I don't go out and catch it. That's not my bag. I knew it was real because of the way it was shot, and the way it was different from everything else, and the way that the animals were, like, moving after they would get hit and you see the blood. And so, like, I definitely saw some shit that I did not need to see, and I feel like a lot of people probably also did. And so for this director to, like, be able to take this back to the festivals and be like, it's restored now, and still not move that to the top of the movie so people can be like, oh no, this is not for me.
Yeah, that is weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so if it's okay, I'm going to kind of wrap this up because, Joe, I'm going to plug our Patreon, because you know what comes out the day before this is our episode on the sadness. So, okay, basically, I think we've talked this out. I mean, I'm saying, like, oh, there's not an easy answer here, but I feel like maybe for some people, they're like, oh, no, there is an easy answer. It's don't show it. But nevertheless, I think this is a really interesting conversation, and listeners, I would like to know your thoughts on this too. And also, for another conversation about content warnings and consent when watching, please head over to our Patreon to listen to our episode on The Sadness, a pretty controversial zombie-ish movie that just also hit Shudder this week. So, yeah. But, yeah. Anyway, if you saw this and didn't know it was coming, we apologize.
Right. So, just in case you weren't sure that these dudes are absolutely bad news and kind of shitty, we end up going back to Stubbs' bar, and we basically break in. Dick and Joe get into a big fight. John just passes out because at this point he's had enough. And I love that through all of this, Doc is just waxing philosophically.
But about, like, the violent nature of civilization, despite its philosophical and materialistic trappings. Like, he gets real deep.
Yeah. people handle their liquor in very different ways, and I feel like we're seeing 3 different versions here.
He's a functioning alcoholic.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen. Some of us have that gift, and we just don't talk about it.
Because he's about to function in an entirely new way.
Well, yeah. So now we get to have the other conversation that's really pertinent to this film. So John ends up back at Doc's, and they get into a drunken wrestling match. And I mean, I immediately saw it because the way that they're touching each other, the way that this can only lead to one thing, you know, we basically cut to black and John once again wakes up the next morning. He is presumably naked, although this time we don't see it. And I quibble with that because it feels like a deliberate distancing from the fact that there was sexual intercourse here. All we see is that Doc's legs are over top of him. And I did want to point out that Doc is weirdly styled. So he's wearing a tank top that's rather long, but it's a scoop neck that's very deep. So it ends up looking like he's wearing a woman's nightgown. So there's an interesting gender play here.
Okay.
I wonder if if since we didn't see the nudity here, I wonder if that is just a sign of the times.
It could be, yeah.
You know, they didn't want to. Oh, that's too far. That's too gay.
Well, because the scene, I can't remember if it's a fade out or if we just cut to the next scene. But yeah, we have them brawling, and we do have this like the final shot is just of them. You know, they're on the ground, they're wrapped up in each other's arms, they're looking, and you have Doc kind of looking up and down John's face. But then we cut to the next scene. And I cannot remember if it was a fade out or a cut away. But if it was a cut, I would be less inclined to be like, oh yeah, that was a sex scene. But if it was a fade out, that to me implies there's more that happens here that we're not going to show you.
So it is a cut, but what we've been focusing on is the swinging of the lamp that they hit when they were wrestling. So it's actually very similar to the moment when John loses all of his money in 2-Up and he stares directly into the light. So in this case, when the light stops swinging, we cut, and that's when he wakes up the next day.
Got it. Yeah, this was not super clear to me. This is where I had to message Joe and be like, well, the Wikipedia page says it's a homosexual encounter, but I didn't see that.
It definitely felt like there was implied some sort of sex, whether or not it was like, I don't know.
Something happened, and something happened twice.
It's twice.
Because he woke up and feeling some kind of way.
Yeah, and the way it was, for whatever reason, that moment where they're wrestling, they look at each other, and then it cuts to the lights, and then it cuts to them waking up, just felt like all the 70s romance movies my mother used to make us watch.
Right.
And I'm like, this is like Murphy's Romance or some shit, right? This is what this is just implied.
Yeah,
and
we kiss,
like,
and the kiss is meant to represent all the way action, and we'll just skip to the end the next day.
Yeah.
Well, and so, yeah, because he's like, he looks ashamed when he wakes up. And so 100%. You could read that as, oh, he's come out of his stupor. He's like, oh my God, what have I been doing for the past, 2 days, 3 days? But, or, oh my God, the
thing I've been fighting has come to pass.
The straw that broke the camel's back, yes. Like, my worst fear, I had sex with a man, and I have to get out. I have to leave. I have to leave. And he sure does fucking try.
Oh, yeah, because he puts on his fucking clothes, and he is ready to run out the door. Doc is like, hey, don't forget your gun that Dick and Joe gave you, a.k.a. please remember to take your phallic object with you on the way out. And John, I mean, he wanders the streets. He ends up back in the bar. He collects his suitcase. We get to see Crawford again. At this point, I was kind of like, all right, movie, you know,
let's go.
I feel like, you know, let's get to it. I love the fact that he ends up hitchhiking. He's shooting animals for food. Like, he has really hit the low point. And then he finally realizes, I should barter the gun to get a ride to Sydney. But because he's still a stupid fucking idiot. He doesn't say Sydney. He just says to the city. And he ends up right back in Yaba. And I'm not going to lie, I did laugh.
Oh.
Same.
Yes.
He hopped in the truck and went to sleep because he's like, I'm back on my privilege shit. I'm being taken care of and I'm fine. And then he's like, oh no. When he wakes up and he sees where he's at.
It is too funny.
Because at this point, like, okay, I felt really bad for him when he lost his money. And it's not that I find him an unsympathetic character, but at this point, I'm just like, dude, you have made your own bed at this point. Like, you had many outs that you did not take.
Yeah. And speaking of Polanski, this kind of like mental breakdown moment where we see this montage of people laughing at him and him trying to make it with Janette and maybe making it with Doc. Like, this whole sequence very much reminded me of that moment where we get the reveal in Rosemary's Baby and all of the neighbors are kind of like leering in at her and so on. So he ends up running to Doc's cabin. He's not there, so he just kind of like falls into a corner and starts to cry. He contemplates suicide. He's got the gun ready to go, but you're not actually sure if he's gonna take that step. And then Doc bursts in and scares him, and he ends up pulling the trigger.
Oh, okay, Trent, because I know you have something to say about this. I actually didn't read it as that. I thought, again, maybe I'm misremembering. I thought he opened the door and he just looked at him and goes, "Don't!" And then like we take a beat and then he pulls the trigger as we like cut to the next scene or whatever.
Yeah, the angle of the gun is what I was like, are you trying to kill yourself? Or what are you, like... Because he has it, at first, he has it in his mouth, which is kind of like a quintessential, or, you know, like...
It would be the more successful way of doing it.
Right. And then he takes it out of his mouth and puts it against his temple at a weird angle that is clearly just going to, like, wound you pretty damn bad.
Well, it's interesting because we do know, too, that he is a successful... Like, he knows his way around guns because he's talked about being a marksman earlier in the film.
Right. So why, if he wants to kill himself, why is he not taking the shot that is going to more likely give him what he wants?
Well, that's where your Doc scared him into pulling the trigger. That would make more sense because it's almost like he puts it in his mouth. He's like, "I'm gonna do this," but then he's like, "No," he's pulling back, right? He's like crying, is moving the barrel of the gun like kind of down his head. And so, yeah, Doc comes in, surprised him. Oops, sorry, gun goes off. I remember it happening where it's like there's a beat, and he like does it after Doc comes in.
He does do it after Doc comes in, but yeah, I guess I hadn't thought that maybe... Okay, I'm interested now because I guess there's two different readings, so we're going to have to rely on listeners letting us know how they interpreted this.
Right, like, because, yes.
Yeah, because I listening to this conversation, I'm just like, was he trying to decide if he was going to do it or not? And that's why he went from the sure bet to the maybe bet. And then Doc walked in, he's like, go for it. And it was still stuck on maybe. So maybe he didn't make an actual decision. Maybe he was still trying to play both sides of the fence and see what was going to happen.
Well, considering that John has really been a passive observer in his own life these last couple of days, it would make sense that he let someone ultimately make this decision for him as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really good point.
Yeah.
So I thought he was dead, but it turns out we wake up in the hospital and he is... I wasn't even sure if he was going to have all of his faculties because Crawford is there and he says, "I prepared this letter that basically suggests it was an accident. And now you're going to sign this letter," which I assume absolves potentially the town from some kind of lawsuit or maybe gives him a clean bill of health as opposed to, "Oops, I tried to kill myself and now I need to be committed."
So that's, yes, I couldn't figure out what Jock's motivation was. Was it, to protect him and the town, or was it to protect John from having to undergo, like, I don't know, psychiatric stuff?
It took me back to that idea I had where the whole town and Doc are in on the same situation. So they know what's going to happen every time they invite a new stranger into town and send them to Doc's.
Right.
And so I feel like he's giving people this kind of spiel if they've survived multiple times.
We have a form letter that we're going to use because we've done it 15 times before.
Exactly.
A template.
Yeah, right? Just sign here. And it's fine.
Print your name, sign your name, initial here.
Yeah, because I feel like everybody knows what goes on in everybody's house. And I feel like they knew sort of roughly what was going to happen with this new stranger because it's happened before. And that's why it's just like, it's cut and paste. It's a routine. There's no hesitation. There's no, let's get into this. There's like, here's what I'm going to tell you happened to you.
See, again, this reminds me of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre where everybody is actually connected to the crimes that are being committed, where it's like, oh, I run out of the house and I go to the convenience store and, you know, the lady there is in on it. And so is the sheriff. Like, everybody knows what's happening.
The only real thing I have to add to this conversation is this man was lucky to have some really good surgeons.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there's no scar.
No.
He has all of his faculties.
All of his hair.
And also,
that gorgeous
this
hair.
tiny little town has a hospital
State
with
of the
really
art.
badass surgeons.
Yeah. So John ends up leaving the hospital and Doc is waiting for him, and they drive to the train station so that John can head back to Tabanda. I thought it was very interesting that we don't have any dialogue between these two. There's no farewell. There's no, well, maybe we did a thing that we both regret. It's very much, hey, I'm just going to pick you up, drive you, and you're going to leave town.
And forget all about this. You're going to put it in the back of your mind and repress it like a motherfucker.
The end of every one-night stand.
Right?
I actually have an album of all my one-night stands.
Oh.
You don't even take them to a diner, give them hash browns or something?
No, but I do take their pictures, and then they're in an album.
Okay, well, now we've established that you're a creepy dude, so.
This is a joke. I don't really do this.
Sure, Trace. That's not my photo album! Sure.
It's just their dick. It's just an album of dicks with a date. Date and a location.
At least buy an external hard drive and keep them digital.
I mean, there's so many I need the external hard drive because it's filled my computer RAM. Okay, I'm done. Move on. Okay. So we're kind of like closing the loop. He's back on the train. We've got, I don't know if they're the same dudes, but they could be. And this time he does accept the bottle of beer. So he's willing to now debase himself to drink with the locals.
He's accepted his alcoholism.
I just love that he spent these 6 weeks getting like drunk, losing all of his money, hunting kangaroos, having some sort of encounter with Doc. We don't get details.
Right.
And he's like, now that I've shot myself and I've healed, let's go back to drinking. Even I would pause. Even I would be like, you know what? I'm gonna look at my choices and maybe put the bottle down for a couple of days.
I mean, but it's something to be said though, but like when you're at your lowest, like what is rock bottom? And can you go lower, or will you make good decisions to bring you out of it, or will you turn to self-medicating with something like booze to make the days go by?
Well, and that, I guess it depends on how we read this ending, right? I think the conventional way of looking at it is this dum-dum has ended up right back where he started. The film literally reproduces the same shots, even like as he gets off this train, goes back into the place that he's been renting, and then we like pull the camera back up to an aerial shot of this isolated fucking one building town. But I think you could look at it as, oh, maybe he's learned a lesson that this isn't that bad. Like, he got out of Yaba. He didn't end up there like Doc, who is maybe a worst case scenario. So I think you could read it slightly hopeful, although I think in John's case, really, the goal was to try to get to Sydney and Robin, and he's ended up back in Tabanda.
Well, and I do, again, like, I like that idea, because, well, again, if you've read the book, you might be watching this entire movie knowing, or at least believing, that Robin is not, like, I mean, she's real, but she's not a real person in his life, you know? And I actually do like that aspect more than if it was his actual girlfriend, because, I mean, she didn't even try to reach him.
Right? Yeah, like, you find out your boyfriend shot himself in the head, and you don't come to visit?
He missed Christmas. He literally missed Christmas.
Yeah, no, that doesn't fly for me. I'm going to need to know where my gift is. I'm going to need to know why our plans fail. I'm going to have follow-ups. And so she can't be real. That's another... This John's whole life, I just need like the Scandal hit board and the threads to help me make it make sense. God.
And your giant bottle of Olivia wine. Yeah.
Yes.
And my popcorn for dinner. And I'm just going to be like, look, Fitz, I'm busy.
It has to be in that Pinot glass, so that really bulbous Pinot glass. Not a normal wine glass, a Pinot glass.
You had to use the word bulbous, didn't you?
Okay. I actually use, but I grew up using the word bulbous because my dad has a bulbous nose where he has like a rounded tip on his nose. So I just grew up calling my dad's nose round bulbous things every bulbous. Day.
Trace sees his first penis. Oh, you have a bulbous penis. No, Trace, that's just the head.
It's just a mushroom head. It's not bulbous. It's a mushroom. Okay, well, that is Wake in Fright, everybody. Trent and Sharai, thank you both for coming on to this. This was a treat to discuss.
Thank you for having us. It was fun.
We apologize that we traumatized you.
Yes.
We've done that to many people, so don't worry about it.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, we've done very mean things to people this season, and so this is just karma being like, guess what?
Well, why don't you let everyone, all of our listeners know, and us, we already know, but where can they find you on social media?
Ooh, I love this question. You can find a Nightmare on Fierce Street at Nightmare Fierce on Twitter and a Nightmare on Fierce Street on Facebook and Instagram. If you find us on one of those, you can see the All My links, which will lead you to our Patreon and all the other shenanigans we get into as a duo.
Yes.
You can find me and my own shenanigans on Twitter or Instagram at Miss Sharai. That's, Miss and Sharai. It's all smushed together. It's 3 S's and it's hard and I'm sorry. I do not know.
You can follow me on Twitter at Trent Reese 5, and then also on Instagram at TReese0508, and Reese is with an S like the candy.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at Horror Queers. Join our Facebook Horror Queers group to hang out and chat with other listeners. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. We're just Horror Queers there. And finally, we've got a YouTube channel with interviews and monthly hangouts as well, so go check that out. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on your podcatcher of choice. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. We are now in May. Well, we're in the middle of May, so go subscribe to get episodes on horror movies that make us cry, the aforementioned The Sadness, the remake of Firestarter, Alex Garland's Men, and an audio commentary celebrating the 15th anniversary of 28 Weeks Later. Joe.
Yes.
What are we discussing next week?
Well, I'm afraid we're not out of problematic territory just yet, but we are going to talk about a more contemporary film, so we'll see if we give it a pass in the same way. We're going to talk about 2017's Incident in a Ghostland.
Yes. So, a couple things. It might also be Ghostland. It's different titles across the world. This is a movie from the director of Martyrs, so that should already give you an idea of what you're in for. We are dealing with a killer, either crossdresser or transgender character. I don't remember if I forgot or if the movie is just unclear. Mm-hmm. And is also a film where a lead actress was actually injured. She had a facial injury on the set during filming one of the action scenes and sued the production after the film was done. So,
yeah.
Just be aware of all that. I actually do really like this movie, from what I recall, but we'll see if that changes next week.
Yeah, and I have seen none of it, so I just know about all of the extra shit that you just listed, and I'm like, oh, and there's a movie in there as well. Okay, yeah. Cool. Excited to see that. A lot of
baggage. So until next week, everyone, we can cross out Wake in Fright.
Indeed, and cross out Horror Queers.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kenneth Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.
It was late in the afternoon when the professor and I took our way towards the east, whence I knew Jonathan was coming.
Jonathan Harker has asked me to note this, as he says he is hardly equal to the task, and he wants an exact record kept.
Dear Madam Mina, I have read your husband's so wonderful diary. Strange and terrible as it is true. I will pledge my life on it.
God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past.
I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula.
Listen to Regarding Dracula wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm.